It's no fun when our kids are sick, but we may just have found the silver lining. Apple and raspberry and orange flavoured electrolyte slushies made by Rehydrate.
Rehydrate slushies are a tasty way to get essential electrolytes into our little ones when they're dehydrated from sickness or even just the Aussie heat. They're delicious and they'll help your little ones feel better in no time. Grab Rehydrate from Coles today.
Who knew that I had an uncle who was building a curriculum that taught kids about their feelings? He was the first person who really ever asked me, "How are you feeling?" And the thing that he did differently than everybody else was he paused and he listened.
It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson.
And I'm Kylie.
And we're the parents of 6 girls. And I've authored 6 books about raising happy families.
While I was raising them. I've been waiting to say that line for so long.
You just, yeah, and I've got no comeback at all. What do I say? That was good.
During 2020, you've had a bunch of interviews with some really remarkable people as you've kind of dissected and discussed and helped parents to understand the psychology behind parenting better. But over the past couple of weeks, we've been talking specifically with Alfie Cohn.
Yeah, how good's that been?
That's been brilliant.
And he's coming back as well, by the way. He said that he would come back one more time to talk about time out. And it's going to be...
That's a big topic.
So that's next week. I'm very excited for that.
Yeah. But today, something really exciting. Someone who knows about kids and big emotions better than anyone else we know.
Yeah, so Professor Marc Bracket is the founder and director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. He's a professor in the Child Studies Center at Yale University. And Marc's also the lead developer of an educational program called Ruler, which is an evidence-based approach to social and emotional learning, or SEL as they call it in schools. Has been adopted by something like 2,000 schools across the US. There's schools here in Australia who are on it. I mean, Marc's a really big deal, and I've been in conversation with him for quite a number of years now.
Marc's expertise in emotions and emotional intelligence means he's worked with some pretty big names. You know, we're talking about companies like Facebook, Microsoft, Google, and he's joining us now.
Welcome, Marc. It's great to have you with us. I'd like to start at the beginning. At a conference that we were both at a while back, some years ago in Sydney, we were talking about how you had an uncle who was a teacher, and he influenced you in really, really great ways. I love the fact that you've got this person, not your parents, who is being that influence on you. I think that's really important. But you mentioned a lot more about this in great detail in your book, Permission to Feel. Can you tell us a bit about Uncle Marvin and how he put you on the path to being an emotion scientist?
Well, as you know from reading my book, I had some trauma in my childhood, quite a lot of trauma. I was abused by a neighbor for many years as a young child. And then I was horrifically bullied in school. I had, this terrible self-esteem and just couldn't get out of my own way. And also nobody really wanted to kind of come my way, except for one person who was my Uncle Marvin. And I should say that I had 2 parents who loved me, but they both were dealing with their own life challenges. My father had a lot of anger from his childhood. My mother had tremendous anxiety and depression. And they were just busy trying to deal with their own feelings, nevertheless deal with mine. I had 2 older brothers. One had a physical illness. The other one had mental health problems. And so my mother was just like lost, dealing with everybody's issues. And so I don't think they had the ability to really attend to my experience. Or I don't even know if they were even could be aware of like what was going on. And so I was blessed that my mother's brother, Marvin, Uncle Marvin, was getting a master's degree in education and counseling in the town where I grew up. And he'd come down the weekends and stay over and we'd chat in the backyard. And who knew that I had an uncle who was building a curriculum that taught kids about their feelings? Except I did. And we'd have these very rich conversations. And he was the first person who really ever asked me that simple but profound question, which is, how are you feeling? And the thing that he did differently than everybody else was he paused and he listened.
And I've noticed that, we have a way of being with people when we see somebody who say, hey, in Australia we say, how you going? How you going, mate? In America, you say, hey, how you doing? But we don't really listen to see what people say. It's a greeting. It's like, hi. There's no real interest in hearing what the other person says. But your Uncle Marvin,
exactly.
would actually ask and then wait?
Because I think there's so many layers to it. One, everybody's busy. And, like, ask me how I'm feeling, Justin.
Mark, how are you feeling?
Let's pretend you're my dad. And
right.
I'm in high school or middle school, and you're like, so let's go for it. Go ahead.
All right. What I'm going to do is I'm not actually going to ask you what you asked me to ask. I'm going to ask what a typical parent would ask at the end of a school day. Because there's a very big difference. You said ask me how I'm feeling, but most parents don't say how are you feeling. Most parents say, hey, Mark, how was school?
Fine.
Yeah. Anything happen?
No.
What'd you get up to? Who'd you talk to? Tell me something.
Nothing.
And that's about it, right? That's kind of, and then parents will say to me, Justin, how do I get my kids to open up? How do I get them to talk to me? But what I'm hearing you in the very question that you asked me to ask, you're saying that at the end of the school day, I should say, hey, Mark, how are you feeling today? How are you feeling this afternoon? How are you feeling about school? Or would it be reasonable to even say, as you get into the car, I can probably tell what kind of a day you've had. And I might say, looks like you've had a really tough day today.
I would prefer not to do that.
Tell me why.
Because I think that behavior is misleading. And so, it's not that comfortable either for someone to say, I have an aunt who does it all the time. She's like, is everything okay? And I'm like, it was until you asked.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, what's wrong? Like, okay, can't wait to have this conversation. So, I prefer more open-ended, or maybe, hey, it looks like you might be having a bad day. Hey, what's going on? Let me share a little bit about what happened to me today. I had this great meeting, but then I had this terrible meeting. And so you're like opening up as you're asking.
There's a real sense of reciprocity there, isn't there? A lot of parents will say, my kids never tell me anything. But I wonder how many of us actually talk to our children and tell them things.
Well, and a lot of parents, a lot of male parents in particular, they feel reluctant to talk about feelings because they think it's weak. I can't tell you how many dads come up to me after I give my presentations and they say things like, oh my goodness, like you are so vulnerable. You shared about your abuse and your bullying and, your mother and your father. And I say, and they say things like, I would never let my son know that I was bullied. And I'm like, why not? And they say things like, well, my son would think, I was weak. And then I say, well, what if your son is being bullied right now? And somehow or another, your mindset around all this basically prohibits you from having deep conversations. Then all of a sudden people start second guessing and they start, taking a little breath and saying, yeah, maybe there's something to this, asking questions.
It's the Happy Families podcast. We're going to continue our chat with Marc Bracket after this very short break.
For a happier family, try a Happy Families membership, because a happy family doesn't just happen. Details at happyfamilies.com.au.
It's the Happy Families podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers. Now, why are you laughing?
Well, because you've never done that before. You've actually just become the anchor of the podcast. Can you believe it?
I'm having a little giggle because we've had the kids been doing it for the last little while and they found it really weird, and now I am too. Anyway, we're talking with Marc Bracket, an expert on human emotions and emotional intelligence.
Thanks for putting up with us there, Mark. Can we get back to Uncle Marvin for a sec? He asks how you're feeling, and then he just listens. And then you have an opportunity to explore with him that you've been experiencing bullying, you don't feel connected to your family, and there's all these challenges going on. Do you disclose the abuse from the neighbours at this point?
I do.
You do? And what happens as he listens and as all of these disclosures are made?
What happens is that I finally feel like there's somebody who cares about me.
Wow.
And I finally feel like there's someone who's my partner in this journey of healing. And I finally feel like someone listens without judgment and isn't saying things like, don't tell me what's happening, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown, which would be my mother. Or my father would say something like, son, you got to toughen up. You got to toughen up, son. Now, it's funny because I have a 5th degree black belt now, and I still don't think of myself as a tough guy.
It's so funny. I think back to my early days in school, and at some point I was being maybe bullied is a stronger term than I'm comfortable using. I've never considered myself as someone who was bullied, but I certainly was being teased and picked on, and I wasn't having a good time of it. And I remember telling my dad about how that felt, and Dad wasn't particularly interested. I mean, I love my dad, and he's a great dad, but he just wasn't really that interested in how I was feeling about it. He said to me, Justin, next time they do it, put your hand out in front of you and scrunch up your fingers into a fist and punch him in the nose. And to my dad, 1970s, 1980s parenting, that's how you fix a problem where someone's not being nice to you. You just punch them in the nose. You toughen up. You get on with it. Don't worry about all those feelings. You won't have to worry about those feelings if you just give them a good punch in the head.
Yeah, I mean, I'm never going to tell someone never to not fight, because sometimes that's the only option. But it's nice to think of alternatives, right? What else might you do? One of the big lessons, from Uncle Marvin was that he was what I call the compassionate emotion scientist, because he didn't take my behavior and my posture. He wasn't triggered by it, right? Because parents get triggered. My parents were so easily triggered by me, activated. I would come home from school, I hate school, I'm never going to school again, and I hate you. And my mother would be, who do you think you are talking to me that way? Get to your room, wait till your father gets home. Wow, I can't wait for Daddy to get home. That's going to be a fun night.
Yeah, give me something to look forward to. Thanks, Mum.
Yeah. And then I would get hit oftentimes by my father for, swearing or yelling at my mother. And then, my father would lose his control, and then my parents would get angry with each other. And then my mother would fight with my father, and my father would fight with my mother. And it just became, and then here I am, this lost soul who's being abused and bullied, sitting there by myself saying, one day I will be an emotions scientist.
But the irony there is you're going away to school and you're being abused and bullied, but then you come home to the place that you're supposed to feel safe, and instead you're being abused and bullied at home by parents who, quote unquote, who love you.
I don't have language. I have no language to talk about my feelings. I have no strategies. I don't even know what the heck a strategy is to deal with feelings. No coping strategies, no management strategies. I have two parents who are activated by, by anything. And so you're just a lost soul at that point trying to survive, because you have no adult role models supporting you.
Yeah. And this isn't to demonize them, right? They're stuck. They don't know what to do.
No clue, because they're blaming themselves for their own misfortunes. They're angry at the world. They haven't dealt with their own parents' issues. And so there's this little boy who's kind of trying to survive, not learning how to deal with his feelings, eating his feelings, doing weird stuff. And it's all done secretly because no one's paying attention.
This has been such a great conversation, Marc. It would be great if we could be a little bit cheeky and ask you to come back again. I would love to kind of just, get into the real nitty-gritties for parents on how they can deal with big emotions.
All right. Thank you so much.
Professor Marc Bracket, the author of Permission to Feel. It's a book about helping our kids and us to understand our emotions better. Hope you've enjoyed this chat with Marc Bracket on today's Happy Families podcast. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with Marc on emotions in the not too distant future. If you have enjoyed the podcast, please jump onto Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. Tell people what you like about the podcast. It's those reviews that help other people to find the podcast and make their families happier. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Roulon. Thanks for making it sound great, Justin. And our executive producer is Craig Bruce. If you'd like more info about how we can make your family flourish, particularly if you'd like that ongoing monthly support, the Happy Families memberships are available at happyfamilies.com.au, or you can follow us on Facebook at Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families.